Hi guys, welcome back. It is a beautiful day here in upstate New York, so I decided to film this outside with chickens. You'll have to excuse some of the background sounds because it is beautiful. People are out working on their yards. So this video is going to be solely about the discussion surrounding the proposed whitelist plan. I'll be doing another video in a little bit. It's going to be up here when that's ready. It's not going to be ready for a second. I got 2 videos to do today. It's going to be a super busy day. So basic breakdown, and I'm going to show you clips from all of this. Basic breakdown is that the commissioners did not understand the scope of what they were asking for until just before the meeting. They came in prepared to vote on it, and to their credit, realized it was a much larger thing than they initially thought. And so they decided that they're going to withhold and push it out a little bit further until they have more information on what exactly it would mean to do a whitelist. There were some excellent talking points that were brought up. One of the commissioners mentioned in a previous agenda item, an item about regulating fishing on the grouper spawning areas, which is not an unheard of practice with other species of fish. Like here, I do a lot of fishing, so there's a certain section of river that you can't fish during the walleye spawn. It's not a super extreme thing. It's understood by all the fishermen in the area. But this commissioner thought that banning fishing in the area where the grouper spawn would be an extreme measure. He doesn't want to ban anything outright because that's an extreme measure. Somebody in the meeting brought up a comparison between banning reptiles and banning grouper because one activity is more regularly accepted, fishing for grouper versus keeping reptiles. And in that same kind of thought, when talking about invasive species, the commissioners were laughing about catching peacock bass without considering the fact that peacock bass are an invasive species. And somebody else brought that up as well, which I thought was fantastic. These were all thoughts I had while I was watching. So without further ado, here are some of the clips from the meeting. The commissioners take, some of the commenters. I didn't get everybody in there because there were 52 of them, I think. A lot of people were talking, which was awesome. And then at the very end, you'll see Commissioner Barreto kind of disregard what everybody else said to say, oh, the last guy summed it up, and here we sat here for hours listening to other people talk. I thought that was kind of a butthole thing to say, but maybe he didn't mean it the way I took it. So anyway, sorry. Here are the video clips. Enjoy.
How many speakers we have?
Good morning. Yes, we have 54 speakers on this topic.
Okay. So before we get into the speakers, let me make a few comments. In my briefing with staff, it kind of caught me off guard that Florida really does not have their hands around this industry. And that's not saying nothing bad about staff, and I just say that it kind of caught me surprised. I said, okay, do we have a list of all the different reptiles and animals that are coming into Florida? And the answer was no. So we don't have a master list, no. So how do we manage something if we don't, we got to have a baseline to start from. And so, and I don't know, Colonel or Tom, if we're shorthanded staff-wise, and this is not nothing against staff. I think we're doing everything we can. It's an enormous issue to evaluate all this. My biggest concern, and part of my comments at the last meeting, and why we said, hey, bring back a rule and in fact kind of stop what's coming in Florida so we can kind of get our hands around everything, is that if you just look at the python, we're literally spending millions of dollars every year to eradicate the python. And that's just one of 20,000, let's say. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that all 20,000, if they get out, are gonna have some kind of impact on the native wildlife or the Florida ecosystem, but I think that's the issue, commissioners. In my opinion, that's the whole crux of the whole issue. As policymakers up here, our concern is we just don't want another python, another tegu lizard. We don't want iguana, the green iguana. I mean, heck, there's more iguanas than there are people in Miami-Dade County now. I believe that. But I think that's really the crux of the issue. It's not trying to put anybody out of business. It's not actually stopping anybody from importing anything. We just want to know what you're bringing in is not going to be detrimental to Florida, you know, if it got out into the wild. So that's really the crux of the issue. If you boil it all down, there's a lot of noise out there. So I just want to kind of say that. Now, before we get on into public testimony, I'm also going to say this to my fellow commissioners. Maybe we ought to give this to the new executive director, Roger Young, Colonel Young, and let him, he just heard what we said. We've asked them to bring a rule here. I've also learned in my briefing that staff has recommended, and I want the public to know this, that maybe that rule shouldn't be implemented now because it would just kind of cause more issues for them. You know what I mean? Am I right with that, Melissa?
That's correct.
Okay, so with that, maybe we ought to consider, like, Roger, why don't you take a good look at this? Let's we got to get our hands around this. I mean, Florida's a leader throughout the country, and I have a feeling that we're not leading in this area. I'm going to tell you up front right now, at least for me, I'm one vote, that I'll vote to defer, to kind of man back to the new executive director, let him get his thoughts, his team together, get his hands around the issue, bring it back to us for an update at the next meeting. But I'm here to listen to the public as well. But I just want the public to know where we're coming from. So, any other thoughts, Vice Chair?
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. We're not ready to vote on this yet. There's 54 people that came to speak to us today, and we're going to hear them.
We will. I was prepared, but once I got my briefing, I didn't realize, and I'm being honest with you, I was a little shocked that we didn't have a much better grip on this, and I didn't realize how big it was. For some reason, I thought it was only 3,000 species. Now I'm hearing 20,000. So just think of the delta there, right? So, yeah. So anyways, you know, Melissa, anything else?
I just wanted to clarify because when I sat back down, they said that you would like for us to come back at the next meeting. Is that with just an update and not rule? I want to be very clear on what we're being asked to do.
Well,
and I understand the new executive director will take a lead on some of that.
Those are our general thoughts right now. We're going to hear from the public. I'm not so sure that even as good as Roger Young is, that he'd be prepared to come back at the next meeting.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a big issue. We have identified it now as a big issue. We have a lot of work to do on this issue. I'm not so sure that Roger on day 2 is prepared to kind of come back and tell us what the plan of action is until he kind of gets with everybody. So
welcome to your new position, Colonel Young.
Yeah. So with that, why don't we start hearing from the public? Vice Chair?
Last 2 years. I am on the technical assistance group on these non-native species issues, so very familiar with what's going on here. And I appreciate that there was an idea at the last commission meeting, and then you saw some data and thought maybe we need to, review this. It was just an idea that was thrown out there, and now you've gotten some more data thrown at you. And I'm not expecting an answer to this, but I think the biggest question you have to ask yourselves is, does it make more sense to worry about 30,000 species and looking at all those species, or should we look at maybe 100 species that need to be listed as conditional or possibly even prohibited? I mean, that just seems like that's a far better approach. That's the approach that we have now, and I think we're actually harming and going backwards by going with this approach where we're going to look at 30,000 species, which is what it's going to be if you combine aquaculture, herpetoculture, mammals, and birds, instead of 100 species. And as a reminder, industry has always been willing to do that, to look at the species that may be an issue. Since 2009, industry asked for tegus to be regulated by FWC. So we were asking for this species to be looked at far before 2021 when action was actually taken. So we are available to that. I know aquaculture has already given a handful of species to FWC at the tag events. So again, I think that's the question you got to ask yourself. More sense to look at 30,000 species or 100 species? And Florida statute 379.2223 does state that FWC is authorized to make, adopt, promulgate, appeal, amend, and enforce reasonable rules. And I think that everyone should realize that this seems to be an unreasonable approach and it's backwards, and we need to go with option number 3, which is continue to look at conditional and prohibited species. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Phil.
I really appreciate you understanding our concerns and taking a step back and saying maybe we need to give this a little more time and do this the right way, because the process that was happening, which seemed to be kind of jamming it down our throats, wasn't going to come up with anything that worked for the pet keepers and worked for the industry here. The draft rules were posted less than 24 hours before this meeting began, and the period for online comment closed 4 days before that. So if you would have voted on draft rules today on the without even allowing online comments on those, and nobody out here even knowing what those rules were, that would have been really unfair. So we really appreciate you taking a step back. Let's slow down, let's do this the right way. These approaches, option 1 and option 2, are both whitelist approaches. They're both killers of industry. We have many small business owners, tens of thousands of jobs, and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for mostly small family farms that would be affected by some of these regulations. So these are real people's lives, and I know that none of you would want your businesses to be regulated in that way, in a rush job, in a way that just seemed to be trying to stamp them out. So I appreciate, let's slow down, let's do this right. White lists don't work. It's been proven over and over. You've heard Major Burton express concern at the TAG meetings about enforcing a whitelist system. We heard Art from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service say, we know blacklists work and whitelists have some issues. So please consider that input of the people who are going to be tasked with enforcing such a regulatory system. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel.
Concerns. I really don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not a small business owner specializing in pets. However, I feel a lot of this has become political, and as a scientist, I'd like to point out a couple of facts that I think are important when you go to make your decision. The first of which is that if you were to draw a line, a parallel line, north of Palm Beach County, somewhere around the Indian River area, and move all the way south to Key West, from the ocean all the way to the eastern boundaries of the Everglades, you will find that 80%, if not more, of the flora species are in fact not endemic and not native to Florida, and some in fact are invasive species. A lot of our landscaping, a lot of what we've created for our own use has also inadvertently become niche areas for species that have been introduced through the pet trade or through other means and have become established. Those species, however, are basically restricted, the vast majority of them, to that disturbed area. We really can't consider that area of Florida a natural area, because it is not, and it has not been. I've been a resident of Florida practically all my life. I've seen a lot of changes. It has not been for many, many decades. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second point is basically that there's a prejudice against the reptiles in general. If you look at invasive species, if you really wanted to take a close-up look, cats, okay, are the #1 invasive species in the area. We have very few regulatory issues with the cats, yet cats probably, per the Audubon Society, there's 1 million stray or feral cats in the United States, accounting for over 1 billion native birds being destroyed every year. True. And in fact, that doesn't even include other smaller mammals and reptiles. It's just basically an Audubon figure. I just wanted to bring those 2 points up for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Armando.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us here. We appreciate you. My name is Jeremiah Grafsgaard. I was born in North Dakota. I grew up in Minnesota. I've traveled all over the world. I was in the Army for 6 years and did a tour of duty in Iraq. And just last September, moved to the great state of Florida to open a business in fish. I breed and sell aquarium fish. Our store, which I now have in Plantation, is also selling reptiles. And we're excited to be launching into business and driving innovation and improving the tax base. So I took a look at the FWC website and wanted to see when the first observations of invasive species in the wild are. A lot of what we're talking about are species that are in people's aquariums, their tanks, their enclosures, and not in the wild. So the majority of the first observations in the wild are actually from the 1800s to the 1980s, almost all of them. A couple in the 90s, 6 in the early 2000s, and 2006 is the last new observed species in the wild. There hasn't been one in 17 years. What is being done is working. The problem that this is attempting to solve doesn't really exist specifically for fish, aquatic fish, freshwater fish species. And so I think consideration needs to be made for what's actually being discovered as an issue in the wild versus the assumption that some problem might exist in the future. I also think that if you listen to the TAG meeting, which I listened to the 2+ hour recording, the majority of folks on that call did not indicate that they were in favor of one option. What they indicated was it's the lesser of two evils and neither option are good. They're both industry killers. Please do not make decisions that are going to put me out of business and eliminate my livelihood because I'm starting on the ground level and trying to start a business. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Let's get started with the degenerated science, half-truths, and outright lies that base some of your rules for the invasive python rule. First, that irresponsible owners are the source of pythons in the Everglades. One irresponsible out-of-state animal dealer lost 940 Burmese pythons, 1,000 reticulated pythons when Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992. These snakes were born at a U.S. breeding facility, all the same DNA as the wild pythons. Burmese took hold, the reticulated pythons did not. Your biologists tell us that 90% of the small mammals, fur bearers, and 94% of the deer have been eaten up by pythons. If this is the case, how could you allow long hunting seasons, no limits on small game or fur bearers? Why do you allow hunters to kill 1 to 4 deer per year in the Everglades if you really believe these big snakes wiped them out? Then we got the apex predator nonsense that is laughable. Let's start with the list of predators that feed on Burmese pythons. Remember, they're not born 12 foot long. Birds of prey, herons, storks, alligators, crocodiles, snapping turtles, soft-shell turtles, king snakes, indigo snakes, cottonmouths, coach whip, minks, otter, panther, bear, bobcat, feral hogs, skunks, coons, and possum. Bareback coons eat more pythons than the other way around.
Jim, I need you to wrap it up, please.
Okay, listen. These snakes feed 4 to 12 times a year. Mammals feed daily, as do birds. There are 32 million coons in the state, second only to Texas.
Thank you, Jim.
There was a bunch of stuff I was going to put in here in the 3-minute speech that I wrote out in the last 2 weeks that was good about FWC, but I'm cutting all that out because I got 2 minutes. The yellow anaconda ban kicked off the additional mass of animal bans currently under litigation, and here we are again to discuss more ban proposals, even though this commission said it wasn't going to do that. This proposed list of animals has cost people's jobs, their homes, people's businesses, some lifelong pets, and turned keepers into criminals, which unfortunately FWC have no control over them now. We know criminals operate outside the rules, and we saw that as a reticulated python that was found a few weeks ago, not chipped, not regulated, someone's illegal pet, and now is sadly dead because of bad regulations. In fact, the 2 years since the last ban was passed, almost the entire reptile community has been either stopped or greatly hindered from removing any of the pre-banned species from the wilds of Florida. And just as I warned before this passed, and from your own staff press releases, the Burmese pythons are spreading, iguana populations are getting more and more dense, reproducing at alarming rates, and the black and white tegus are also spreading and reproducing in numbers not seen before. None of these species banned have gotten any more prevalent. None of the other species banned have gotten any more prevalent than before the ban was, or any less. And yes, I've been working my butt off to keep my businesses going with less species, more rules, and through COVID and this current recession, I'm working twice as hard for half the money. Punished, it feels, for running a good, honest, legitimate business, doing what I love. In conclusion, the only thing that that's happened since the ban was enacted is the animal community has suffered greatly, the wilds of Florida have suffered greatly, berms, iguanas, and tegus are even more out of control, and FWC had to increase its budgets substantially each year to try to keep us what the animal industry was doing for free.
Thank you.
To close up, I recommend that you rescind the prohibited species rules and go back and relook at the conditional species rules.
Thank you. Jordan. Jeff, you're our last speaker.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Turner. I've been here in Florida my entire life. Grandfather came here in 1923 down to Miami. I'm a TAG member for Marine Life, and the state of Florida is in a very unique position. We've been working, the aquarium industry has been working with FDACs for many years with the culture of freshwater and marine ornamentals, from fish to invertebrates to corals to plants, everything in between. We have a great relationship, and the state of Florida is the #1 producer of ornamental fish in the species I said in this hemisphere, supplying the largest market in the world for pets that basically live in aquariums. The reptile side I'm not at expertise at, but I really appreciate the idea of working forward with the new colonel, and I'd like to offer the blue ring octopus, the box jellyfish from Australia, and the crown of thorn starfish is the first marine ornamentals we should also ban immediately from commerce in the state of Florida. Thank you very much.
Jeff, thank you. And that concludes our speakers on this topic, Mr. Chair.
You know, it's funny, the last speaker summed it all up. He gave us 3 things that we should ban from coming into Florida. That's the whole point. You know? So we last 4 hours of testimony, and then the last speaker made the point. It's perfect. So we discussed the item already. I think we've given staff the direction in which way to go. The colonel's got his marching orders, so unless anybody else has anything else to say? The Vice Chair? Yep.
Thank you to the stakeholders for one. You are the good guys, right? You are the people that are doing it right. Okay, you're putting yourselves out there. I'd ask you, okay, because our fear, honestly, is the bad actors, right? And they're not here. And how can you help us identify those bad actors, right? And, you know, does it sound like squealing on your friend? Perhaps, but it's those bad actors that require us to take action. And no, we don't want it to be draconian, but action does need to be taken. And so if you can help us, help our law enforcement, take some of these bad actors out, you know, we're not here to kill your livelihood, not in the least. So I know this is going to come back, but that was just one message that I kind of wanted to get out. And again, thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Colonel, you good? All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item.
As you can see, this conversation is far from over, so I will keep you as updated as I can as things come out. Right now I have to go edit the Holy Thursday Massacre part of the conversation and get that up for you guys. I want to do a lot of commentary on it, but if I do, it's going to be a massive video. And I want you guys to see all that went down in that conversation, all that didn't go down in that conversation. And I'll get more into that in this next video that should be out hopefully within an hour if I really push it. So I'll see you guys over there, and feel free to have a conversation in the comments. I'll be down there chatting with you guys, and anything that I don't cover in the next video I will cover in the comments of that video. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in a moment.